Hello, welcome to CBC Weekly Talk. I am Anastasia Laurina. The 2024 European Parliament election took place from 6 to 9 June. The European People's Party, which includes President of the European Commission Ursula von der Leyen, won the elections by a large margin. Far-right parties had their best ever European Parliament election with major gains in France and Germany. President of France Emmanuel Macron has called snap legislative elections later this month after his party suffered a humbling defeat. More about the results and the consequences of the European Parliamentary elections in my program now. Joining me from Brussels, Gary Cartwright, publishing editor of the EU Today. Warm welcome to CBC Weekly Talk. Hello. So, far-right parties are predicted to win a record number of seats in the European Parliament. What caused these results?
Yeah, to be honest, there's no surprise there with the result. They did indeed do very well across the board, but particularly in certain countries. The impact of the election result was felt almost immediately, with President Macron calling a snap election. In France, this was not something that we really expected, this kind of a response. It's quite dramatic. He may come to regret that one, but really across the board we saw the far right making significant gains, very significant gains in those countries such as here in Belgium, where the right wing has quite a prominent sort of position, particularly where I'm sitting now in Flanders. We saw those votes going up. Again, that was expected. That's what the polls were saying. And really in most countries we did see gains for the far right, but I would say that this is probably not going to have any destabilizing effect on the European Parliament.
That's very interesting. But apart from the reaction of the European Parliament and the future decision, how do you see the balance of power shiftings within the European Union institutions?
I don't think there'll be too much of a shift of obviously it's where the centre of power is. It's not going to shift too much because, as you pointed out, the European People's Party is still the dominant political group, the dominant pan-European party, and that will ensure a very good degree of stability, I would argue, not least because, of course, it's very easy for the other right of centre groups such as the ECR, the European Conservatives and Reformists, to work closely with the EPP and to, as I say, to ensure stability. I don't think that the far right have sufficient numbers to really affect anything in terms of the work of the European Parliament. Probably one of the most important roles it has now is to actually sign off legislation, which, as you're probably aware, originates with the Council of Ministers, or the European Council, as it likes to be known, and the European Commission. The Parliament does actually sign off the legislation, and I don't think that the shift to the right is going to really affect too much what the Parliament approves of and what the Parliament doesn't approve of, and also on that process, the amendments that the Parliament would make to legislation. I don't think that there's a problem in terms of stability of the institutions.
Well, the European People's Party won the election, as you rightly mentioned. Ursula von der Leyen has been serving as the President of the European Commission. So in the future, how will her leadership continue to shape the EPP's agenda and influence the direction of the European Union? If there are any changes, significant changes we should expect from that?
Well, it will be interesting to see the makeup of the new European Commission, and of course each member state has to put forward two candidates, one male, one female. I will be very, very interested to see who those candidates are. Do any of those candidates come from the far right in any of those countries? Possibly that may be the case in Hungary. I would predict, maybe others. But again, Ursula von der Leyen, I think we can safely say she's a very safe pair of hands. She is a very good public figure for the Commission. She's a good public speaker. She engages well. And this particular commission that she's presided over has been relatively free of any major scandals or controversies. It's been a steady ship, I would say. So I would assume that that will continue that way.
Right. You previously said about the decision of President Macron to have a snap election in France. What factors do you believe contributed to this unexpected decision? Is it only about the loss of the party in the election of the European Parliament?
To be honest, it looks like a little bit of panic has set in there. It was an extraordinary decision. And the polls at the moment, such as they are, do suggest that Marine Le Pen's party could actually win this. Although I noticed that those polls that are suggesting that that could be the case qualify that by saying that there's no way that she could win an overall majority. Okay, far-right parties are not really very good at entering into coalitions. Particularly not with other far-right parties. You know, it's a kind of very sort of territorial kind of part of politics. Did he need to do this? No. I followed many elections over the decades and worked on many elections. This is the 5th European elections that I followed closely, and I think everybody was surprised by this move, and it could come back to slap him in the face, I fear.
You rightly say that is it not your first experience of observing the European parliamentary elections? So coming back to the consequences for Macron's party within the European Parliament, what is the main reason for this? Can you provide any specific arguments of why this has happened this time?
I think if there's one thing that defines these elections, it's that the political elite has been forced to listen to the electorate, which politicians are not always so good at this. Traditionally, the EU elections will be focusing on the economy, on security, on stability, on the benefits to the member states, and also, you know, kind of looking ahead to maybe making the institutions look more attractive for potential new members. Listen, I speak to members of the public a lot. They're not interested in this. They're interested in immigration. They're interested in the rising housing costs, availability of housing, availability of social housing, unemployment. They're interested in crime. They feel insecure in their own homes. They feel insecure on the streets. And rightly or wrongly, generally, I would say this is blamed on immigrants. Immigrants are a visible excuse, because the level of migration, particularly in cities in Europe, has gone through the roof. London's barely recognizable, I have to say. Brussels going the same way. It's very easy, as all politicians know, if you can't really explain the phenomena, if you can't explain what's going wrong around you, just point at the immigrants. It's a cheap trick, but it's an easy one, and it seems to have worked for the far right on this occasion.
So what implications this decision may have for the political landscape in France and the broader European Union?
Well, this could actually be positive, because this may actually cause the political elites to step back and realize that actually there are problems that do need to be addressed. They're uncomfortable. They may be politically incorrect. They may not sit well with the left. But the reality is in front of us when we look at these election results. Very often in a country, you might see, in local elections, you might see far-right candidates doing better than expected, better than justified. We've never seen anything on a scale like this, and this is not just in one country, it's not in two countries, this is really across Europe. This is, I would say, this is a major event in European politics. In years to come, people are going to be looking back at these 2024 elections and asking the question, how on earth did we get to this?
This far-right party, if they take the majority place in the French Parliament, what kind of implications it can bring for the president of the country?
Well, of course, Macron would like to leave a legacy, and this is not the one that he would have foreseen for himself. For the country, I think that the more mainstream parties are going to have to take a look at their policies. They're going to have to take a look at how they communicate with the electorate, because the message that we're seeing at the moment is that the electorate is not very happy with them.
Will any kind of violations were detected during the elections mentioned by the observers or the journalists, which can be also publicly available?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Well, there is another very important issue. You yourself mentioned the problem with immigrants in some of the European countries, which is a big concern for the locals there. But apart from that, we know that far-right parties are cashing in on decades of campaigning against Islam. So when it comes to the Muslims majority who live in some countries, including France, for example, can we predict that the Islamophobic tendencies will increase in those countries?
I believe that is the case. Certainly here I'm in Antwerp at the moment. Antwerp is a very middle-class city. It's very dominated by the Flemish people. Flemish, of course, is the language here. It has a very strong cultural identity, and the people who, I hate to use the word immigrants because it sounds like you're just taking lots of different people and slapping an easy label on them, but they're very visible. They're visible because of the style of dress, particularly with the women. Antwerp people are very casual, very laid back. They don't like seeing people wearing, but burqas are illegal, by the way, in Belgium, but that's a rule, that's not a law, that's not really enforced. There are whole districts which going back 2 generations were very stable middle-class areas where houses are now divided into, subdivided into flats, into apartments. Social housing is being dominated by migrant groups. So it's a part of the population that's very visible and, again, easy to blame. Conservatives always tend to, adhere to the old adage that change is good, but no change is better. We're seeing a lot of change very, very quickly. And in that context, we are seeing economic issues, we're seeing security concerns, we're seeing shortages of housing, we're seeing inflation. Very, very easy to find the scapegoats. Worked well for Adolf Hitler, didn't it? Now, that's not a name that we would like to use, but it's a kind of what happened during the Second World War, and actually the genocide, the Holocaust, actually affected Antwerp very, very badly because of very, very large Jewish population here. And so still in living memory, that those days are still here. I mention that because it's an example from history, and there is an old adage that those who do not learn the lessons of history are condemned to repeat them.
Can we say that the results of these elections will more have the consequences for the domestic policy of the European Union rather than to bring significant changes in the foreign policy?
In terms of foreign policy, I think that this is a very difficult time because we're involved in 2 conflicts at the moment and very fearful of possibly a third one. I don't think that the change in the makeup of the Parliament is going to affect this at all, because in reality the policy is more dictated by the Council of Ministers, by the European Council, and those are the member states ministers, as you know. So I don't think that it's going to make any real change. The European Commission, it should always be remembered, is really a kind of a bureaucratic institution more than a political institution. And I think that they will be led by the member states.
That's a big problem because there is a so difficult time for the member states to find a consensus on any kind of issues in regards to the domestic policy when it comes to migration issues. The position of Hungary, Bulgaria or some other member states are not coinciding in all the issues. And when it comes to the foreign policy especially, the countries have more debates rather than to have a mutual approach to the decision-making process. I remember with you just some months ago had a nice meeting in Brussels where we had a chance to speak about the reforms inside the European Parliament when it comes to lobby groups and apart from that overall the development of these European institutions. So how do you envision the role of the European Parliament evolving in the coming years? And in your opinion, what reforms, if any, do you think are necessary to strengthen its effectiveness after the elections?
The role of the European Parliament, I think, should be concentrating on maintaining stability. I referred earlier to stability, the importance of stability. The rise of the far right could be seen as a threat to this. I don't believe it will be for reasons that I've tried my best to outline. I think that the European Parliament needs to maintain a collective level heads, first of all, not to panic. Very importantly, not to make the mistake of trying to censor the far right. I could see that happening, actually. I could see that happening. They must not be trying to censor the far right. These are elected politicians, remember. These are people who have won very, very strong mandates. If the far right are censored to the point that they cannot do their jobs properly, as we saw to a degree after 2004 with the UK Independence Party, the Parliament administration was not very friendly towards UKIP. I can understand why, but they were not. They should not be making this mistake because by turning against UKIP, by marginalising Eurosceptics, by refusing to give Eurosceptics an equal voice, they have Brexit. What might happen if they refuse to give a voice to those politicians who, remember, each of those politicians is representing the voices of hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of voters? No, the far right, as big a concern as this may be, must not be censored. Freedom of speech must be absolute. Either everybody has it or you do not have freedom of speech.
We know about some difficulties in the forming of mutual approach when it comes to the foreign policy, especially on behalf of France in the last months. So now, when there is a rise of far right in France and Germany, do you think that it will be more difficult to have a consensus on the issues which is in particular interest of the European Union, especially again when it comes to the situation inside the French government?
I think yes, because inside the member state governments, certainly those affected by this major shift to the right, we may see problems. Here in Belgium, we have an issue in that the main party, certainly in Flanders, is excluded from government because it's considered to be too right. This is Vlaams Belang. I think, I might be wrong on the actual numbers, but I think they polled around about 24 or 25% in the federal elections, which we had on the same day, on Sunday, same day as the European elections here. And that is a cause of major contention within the country. It is the disenfranchisement of their voters. And this leads us to where? This leads us to a situation where the Flemish region is now being discussed in the context of removing itself from Belgium. Independence for the Flemish region. This is what happens when you don't let people have a say. This is what happens when you marginalise them. This should be a warning, by the way, to the European Union.
Well, Harry, thank you. Thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure.
Thank you. You watch CBC Weekly Talk. My name is Anastasia Larina. Stay with us and see you in the next edition.